me just say earlier we had a couple of references to the economist Mark Zandi, who testified before this committee at our last hearing. And I just want to say, first of all, I think it's important to know his background. He was advisor to the McCain campaign in the last election, and I think he made clear at the last hearing his forecast was off, as were many economists, because we've had a series of events which he described in some detail last week, which I think, in fairness, we ought to remind people of. First of all, the disturbances in the Middle East that had a dramatic effect on oil prices. Oil prices went up. That meant gasoline prices went up. All heating fuels went up. That operated like putting a tax on the American economy and the global economy. So that had an effect on slowing things down. Second, we had the tsunami and the resulting nuclear disaster in Japan. That had an effect on global demand. That had an effect on manufacturing. Then on top of that, we had the European debt crisis. We read about that every day. Greece, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, increasingly Italy. That has had an impact on confidence. And without confidence, as I think all of you have said at various times in your testimony, businesses that are sitting on $1 trillion in cash are reluctant to invest. A final point I'd make is, what kind of downturn are we having here? In part, I believe it's a balance sheet recession. That is, because financial firms have to rebuild their balance sheets, they've had to pull back from extending credit. I hear about this almost every day I'm home from small businesses in terms of securing credit. And that is what the Reinhardts found in their study. And I'd say to you, Dr. Foster, you say 2 years is enough for recovery. That's not what they found. They looked at 200 years of economic history, 44 countries. What they found is it takes 8 to 10 years to recover, not 2 years, 8 to 10 years. And we're 2 years into this. So we are in a very different situation than a garden variety recession. When you have what is in part a balance sheet recession, you have weak aggregate demand. Where you've got weak aggregate demand, where is it going to come from? If the federal government doesn't put in its oar, there is no other place big enough to give lift. That's my own belief. I also believe that whatever is done to give lift has got to be in the context of a plan that is credible and serious to get our debt under control. Because the Reinhardts also found once you get to gross debt of more than 90% of GDP, your future economic prospects are reduced. So we are in a very tough situation, and it's a complicated situation. Dr. Rivlin, let me just ask you, do you believe that it would be harmful to at this point have dramatic cuts in federal spending?
I do.
And why?
Because it cuts into demand. You lay off people from the federal workforce or from the state workforces that are supported in part by federal grants. You cut back on payments going directly to people, as in unemployment compensation or food stamps or the other programs, safety net programs. Now, nobody's going to cut those first, but some of the extensions end. So people have less money to spend, and they don't spend it, and the recession gets worse. I believe that's why the first package, the stimulus package, prevented a worse, a deeper recession, although it wasn't perhaps perfectly designed to do that.
Dr. Holzer, what do you believe?
I agree. I think that that large and immediate cuts in spending would have harmful effects. Certain kinds of spending are more stimulative than others. It's quite interesting to me that we have delayed in extending unemployment insurance. We know, and again, unemployment insurance in a very healthy economy could convince workers not to take jobs. But in this kind of economy with 9% unemployment, it's very hard to make that case. And the money seems to have a very powerful stimulative effect. The same for food stamps and other things. And I find it really puzzling that some economists will say, well, even any talk of tax increases anywhere at any time has this terrible depressive effect, but cutting spending right now is perfectly fine. That flies in the face of everything I've ever learned about macroeconomics. Spending increases and cutting taxes really have relatively similar effects in most macroeconomic models. To say that one is terrible and one is fine really just doesn't make any sense, and I think flies in the face of most of the evidence we have. Immediate cuts in spending of the kinds talked about would have depressive effects on the economy.
Dr. Foster,
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think what you see here is two very different concepts of how the economy works. This isn't ideology, this isn't partisanship. We have different views on how an economy works. I don't believe in alchemy. I believe when you start with lead, you end up with lead, and you don't end up with gold. When government increases its spending and increases its borrowing, the money had to come from someplace. It's not like the Fed, which actually can print dollars. The Treasury doesn't print dollars. The Treasury borrows money, and it had to come from someplace. And when it comes from someplace, it's not there anymore. It's not there, and we don't know who would have used the funds. Maybe it would have been consumers buying cars. Maybe it was somebody buying a house. Maybe the trade deficit would have been lower because we didn't have to import as much capital from abroad. We will never know where the money came from, but we know it came from somewhere. So we can't just wave a wand and create purchasing power by running budget deficits. It's not a question, as I said, of ideology or partisanship. It's a very different conception of how an economy works.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, and it's healthy for us to discuss these differences. I mean, it's amazing if some of my colleagues want to suppress these debates. I don't think they should be suppressed. I think it's critically important we have these debates and have these discussions. I think it's entirely healthy.